All right. Now that I'm being a bit more organized, we are starting the rights of man. Among the inclivities by which nations or individuals provoke and irritate each other, Mr. Burke's pamphlet on the French Revolution is an extraordinary instance. Neither the people of France nor the National Assembly were troubling themselves about the affairs of England or the English Parliament, and why Mr. Burke should commence an unprovoked attack upon them, both in Parliament and in public, is a conduct that cannot be pardoned on the score of manners, nor justified on that of policy. There is scarcely an epithet of abuse to be found in the English language with which Mr. Burke has not loaded the French nation and the National Assembly. Everything which rancor, prejudice, ignorance, or knowledge could suggest are poured forth in the copious fury of near 400 pages. In the strain and on the plan Mr. Burke was writing, he might have written onto as many thousands. So, dude was angry. He's doing an unprovoked attack on France and the National Assembly. And he wrote 400 pages steaming mad about it. Wow. And dude's like, look, he was writing so fervently, he could have went on for thousands of pages. When the tongue or the pen is let loose in a frenzy of passion, it is the man and not the subject that becomes exhausted. So he didn't exhaust the subject. He's saying Burke just got tired of hearing himself write. Hitherto, Mr. Burke has been mistaken and disappointed in the opinions he had formed on the affairs of France, but such is the ingenuity of his hope, or the malignancy of his despair, that it furnishes him with new pretenses to go on. There was a time when it was impossible to make Mr. Burke believe there would be any revolution in France. His opinion then was that the French had neither the spirit to undertake it nor the fortitude to support it, and now that there is one, he seeks an escape by condemning it. Not sufficiently content with abusing the National Assembly, a great part of his work is taken up with abusing Dr. Price, one of the best-hearted men that lives. Ooh, so there's some personal beef. And the two societies England known by the name of the Revolution Society and the Society for Constitutional Information. Dr. Price had preached a sermon on the 4th of November of 1789, being the anniversary of what is called in England the Revolution which took place 1688. Mr. Burke, speaking of this sermon, says, "The political divine proceeds dogmatically to assert that by the principles of the Revolution, the people of England have acquired three fundamental rights: to choose their own governors, to cashier them for misconduct, and to frame a government for ourselves." Dr. Price does not say that the right to do these things exists in this or that person, or in this or in that description of persons, but it exists in the whole. That is a right resident in the nation. Mr. Burke, on the contrary, denies that such a right exists in the nation, either in whole or in part, or that it exists anywhere, and what is still more strange and marvelous, he says that the people of England utterly disclaim such a right, and that they will resist the practical assertion of it with their lives and fortunes. That men should take up arms and spend their lives and fortunes not to maintain their rights, but to maintain that they have not rights. It is an entirely new species of discovery and suited to the paradoxical genius of Mr. Burke. So apparently this Dr. Price guy gave a sermon, and he was saying that we have the fundamental rights, the people of England, well, not really the people, he goes on to explain, but the whole of England has the right to choose their own governors, to cashier them for misconduct, and to frame a government for ourselves. And Mr. Burke is like, no, the English don't have that right. The nation doesn't have that right. Heck, England will even stand up and fight you if you say they have that right. How dare you put rights in their mouth? How dare you, sir? Now, I will fight you. And dude's like, this is... what a discovery that is, that people will fight you to say that they do not have rights. This must only make sense to Mr. Burke. The method which Mr. Burke takes to prove that the people of England have no such rights, and that such rights do not now exist in the nation, either in whole or in part, or anywhere at all, is of the same marvelous and monstrous kind with what he has already said. For his arguments are that the persons or the generation of persons in whom they did exist are dead, and with them the right is dead also. To prove this, he quotes a declaration made by Parliament about 100 years ago to William and Mary in these words: "The Lords spiritual and temporal and commons do in the name of the people aforesaid," meaning the people of England then living, "most humbly and faithfully submit themselves, their heirs and posterities forever." He also quotes a clause under another Act of Parliament made in the same reign, the terms of which he says, "bind us," meaning that people of that day, our heirs, and our posterity to them, and their heirs and posterity to the end of time. Mr. Burke conceives his point sufficiently established by producing those clauses, which he enforces by saying that they exclude the right of the nation forever. So, and not yet content with making such declarations repeated over and over again, he further says that if the people of England possessed such a right before the Revolution, which he acknowledges to have been the case not only in England but throughout Europe at an early period, yet that the English nation did, at the time of revolution, most solemnly renounce and abdicate it, for themselves and for all of their posterity forever. So he's saying that there was a time in which the people of England and the nation as a whole did have the right to choose their own governors, to cashier them for misconduct, and to frame a government for themselves. But they abdicated that right. They said they want nothing to do with it, and also they condemned their posterity to live with this rule, which they clearly have the right to do, says Mr. Burke, or implies. As Mr. Burke occasionally applies the poison drawn from his horrid principles not only to the English nation, but to the French Revolution and the National Assembly, and charges that august, illuminated, and illuminating body of men with the epithet of usurpers, I shall sans ceremone place another system of principles in opposition to his. The English Parliament of 1688 did a certain thing which for themselves and their constituents they had a right to do, and which it appeared right to be done. But in addition to this right, which they possessed by delegation, they set up another right by assumption, that of binding and controlling posterity to the end of time. The case, therefore, divides itself into two parts, the right which they possessed by delegation, and the right which they set up by assumption. The first is admitted, but with respect to the second, I reply, there never did, there never will, and there never can exist a parliament or any description of men, or any generation of men, in a country possessed of the right or the power of binding and controlling posterity to the end of time, or of commanding forever how the world shall be governed, or who shall govern it, and therefore all such clauses, acts, and declarations by which the makers of them attempt to do what they have neither the right nor the power to do, nor the power to execute, are in themselves null and void. every age and generation must be free to act for itself in all cases, as the ages and generations which preceded it. The vanity and presumption of governing beyond the grave is the most ridiculous and insolent of all tyrannies. Man has no property in man, neither has any generation a property in the generations which are to follow. The Parliament or the people of 1688 or of any other period has no more right to dispose of the people of the present day or to bind them or to control them in any shape whatsoever than to the Parliament or the people of the present day have to dispose of or bind or control those who are to live 100 or 1,000 years hence. Every generation is and must be competent to all the purposes with which its occasions require. It is the living and not the dead that are to be accommodated. When a man ceases to be, his power and his wants cease with him. And having no longer any participation in the concerns of the world, he has no longer any authority in directing who shall be its governors, or how its government shall be organized, or how administered. I am not contending for nor against any form of government, nor for nor against any party here or elsewhere. That which a whole nation chooses to do, it has a right to do. Mr. Burke says no. Where then does the right exist? I am contending for the rights of the living, and against the being willed away and controlled and contracted for by the manuscript assumed authority of the dead. And Mr. Burke is contending for the authority of the dead over the rights and freedom of the living. There was a time when kings disposed of their crowns by will upon their deathbeds, and consigned the people, like beasts of the field, to whatever successor they appointed. This is now so exploded as to scarcely be remembered, and so monstrous as hardly to be believed. But the parliamentary clause upon which Mr. Burke builds his political church are of the same nature. The laws of every country must be analogous to some common principle. In England, no parent or master, nor all the authority of Parliament, omnipotent as it has called itself, can bind or control the personal freedom, even of an individual beyond the age of 21 years. On what ground of right, then, could the Parliament of 1688 or any other Parliament bind us all posterity forever? Those who have acquitted the world, and those who are not yet arrived at it, are as remote from each other as the utmost stretch of mortal imagination can conceive. What possible obligation, then, can exist between them? What rule or principle can be laid down, that of two non-entities, the one out of existence and the one not in, and who never can meet in this world, the one should control the other to the end of time? So basically, that's a very complicated way of saying that if the rights to govern themselves do not exist within the living, then who do they exist with? How can the laws of, like he's saying, the laws of every country must be analogous to a common principle. In England, no parent nor master nor authority of all Parliament, omnipotent as it has called itself, can bind or control the personal freedom even of an individual beyond the age of 21 years. On what ground of right, then, could the Parliament of 1688 or any other Parliament bind all posterity forever? So he's saying that there is no authority that can bind the rights of the individual and their personal freedom. So he's challenging government in essence, I believe here. He's saying, he just slides it in, nor the authority of Parliament can bind or control the personal freedom even of an individual beyond the age of 21 years. So he's saying that. That's some big claim. And then he's saying, on what ground then could they control all posterity forever? And then he goes on to say, those who have quitted the world, those who are dead, they are now a non-entity. They no longer exist, and they can no longer interact with the world. And those who have yet to be born are also non-entities. They cannot interact with the world. So how can one, the person who is dead, have any say over the lives of those yet to come? That's a great point. He's saying even the parliaments that exist today cannot control people. So how can the rules of people who existed prior, like the parliaments of today cannot control the people of today. They have no right to constrain the freedom of the people today. Therefore, how can the parliaments of yesteryear have any say over the people of tomorrow? Weird way to say it, I don't know. I'm not poetic. So, in England, it is said that money cannot be taken out of the pockets of the people without their consent. But who authorized, or who could authorize, the Parliament of 1688 to control and take away the freedom of posterity, who were not in existence to give or to withhold their consent? They couldn't consent. So if they can't consent, there is no rule other than that by consent. Because he already said that which the whole nation agrees to can be implemented because the whole nation agrees. Sure, they have every right to impose rules on themselves. But if you do not consent, and by extension they cannot consent, therefore there is no right to rule. I like that. I dig that. Do you dig it? I dig it. Let's see. And limit and confine their right of acting in certain cases forever. A greater absurdity cannot present itself to the understanding of man than what Mr. Burke offers to his readers. He tells them, and he tells the world to come, that a certain body of men who existed 100 years ago made a law, and that there does not now exist in the nation, nor ever will, nor ever can, a power to alter it? Under how many subtleties or absurdities has the divine right to govern been imposed on the cruelty of mankind? Mr. Burke has discovered a new one, and he has shortened his journey to Rome by appealing to the power of this infallible parliament of former days, and he produces what it has done as a divine authority. For that power must certainly be more than human, which no human power to the end of time can alter. So he's saying that Burke, by saying that the Parliament of 1688, he's saying that rule is legitimate. He must be a divine rule. This Parliament must have been made of divine people. And we often do find ourselves attributing to the minds of our forefathers this kind of divine sense. Like, we basically enshrine divinity to our founding fathers in America. Which is kind of why I'm reading this work. Thomas Paine never wanted us to do that. And I'm pretty sure a lot of them never wanted us to do that. They wanted us to write new shit all the time. They gave us a living document to kind of inspire us, like, hey, if this document ever stops living and it's like on its deathbed, pull the fucking plug! Pull the fucking plug! Write some new shit! But who am I to say? I'm an idiot. I'm an idiot. But Mr. Burke has done some service, not to his cause, but to his contrary, by bringing those clauses to public view. They serve to demonstrate how necessary it is at all times to watch against the attempted encroachment of power and to prevent its running to excess. It is somewhat extraordinary that the offense for which James II was expelled, that of setting up the power by assumption, should be reacted under another shape and form by the Parliament that expelled him. It shows that the rights of man were but imperfectly understood at the Revolution. For certain it is that the right which that Parliament set up by assumption, for by delegation it had it not, and could not have it, because none could give it. So it's saying they assumed the right to govern forever, but they could not have this right by delegation because the people who would be able to delegate that right did not exist, so therefore they could not ever delegate that right. Over the persons and freedoms of posterity forever was of the same tyrannical unfounded kind which James attempted to set up over the Parliament and the nation, and for which he was expelled. So this same Parliament expelled a king, and then said that, yeah, we're going to make some rules for everybody forever, which is what the king was doing. They didn't understand what they were doing. They were just doing the same stuff. That's the same stuff. You don't understand. You don't have the right to say that. They ask him why you say that. Alright, the only difference is, for in principle they differ not, that one was a usurper over the living, and the other over the unborn. So King James was a mean person, a usurper. He was stealing the rights and ripping them away from the hearts of the living, breathing children. And these were doing it to the unborn, to the people yet to come, to the fetuses. They were doing it to the fetuses. And as the one of them has no better authority to stand upon the other, both of them must equally be null and void and of no effect. So he's saying, if there's a law that a government does not have the right to create, it is null and void. We can disregard it. We can disregard it. We can disregard it. It is null and it is void. We can disregard it. Fuck the law. Fuck the police coming straight from the underground. I can't sing that song because of my pale skin. Wigga. That was incriminating. I don't like it. It's stupid. I'm stupid. Don't listen to me. I'm stupid. Alright. From what, or from whence, does Burke prove the right of any human power to bind posterity forever? He has produced his clauses, but he must produce also his proofs that such a right existed, or show how it existed. If it ever existed, it must now exist, for whatever appertains to the nature of man cannot be annihilated by man. It is the nature of man to die, and he will continue to die as long as he continues to be born. But Mr. Burke has set up some sort of political Adam, in whom all posterity are bound forever. He must therefore prove that his Adam possessed such a power or such a right. Okay. The weaker any cord is, the less it will bear to be stretched. The worse is the policy to stretch it, unless it is intended to break it. Had anyone proposed to overthrow of Mr. Burke's positions, he would have proceeded as Mr. Burke has done. He would have magnified the authorities on purpose to have called the right of them into question. And the instant the question of right has started, the authorities must have been given up. It requires but a very small glance of thought to perceive that although laws made in one generation often continue in force through succeeding generations, yet that they continue to derive their force from the consent of the living. A law not repealed continues in force, not because it cannot be repealed, but because it is not repealed, and the non-repealing passes for consent. Wow. The non-repealing passes for consent. So anytime we are not actively searching the law and saying, hey, this is not just, we are consenting. That is powerful. That is powerful. And I want to highlight that section in the book. I'm going to go ahead and write that down. Let's see. How did I get all the way to page 120? What the hell happened? Don't listen to me, I'm dumb. I'm just making some notes. I love that. This is really neat. Any law that is, what is the word that I'm looking for? Propagated. Without proper consent is null and void. I love that. So we need to keep that. Let's see here. How does he prove the right? Oh, this is interesting. A law not repealed anytime, this is me speaking, anytime that we do not actively scrutinize and rally to repeal defunct legislation, we are, how did you freeze it? We are passing our consent. Don't like that. I don't like that, but that means that we have to be more active in our political beliefs. We have to read the laws of the country that we live in. They should be taught in school, but they're not for a reason. If we don't know the laws, then we're just passively consenting to them. We have to be active and study the law. We have to know the law. That's why I need to read the entire United States Code, but we'll learn that after this. I'm getting my ideals and foundations, and then we'll tackle the fucking law. We'll fucking make it squeal like a goddamn pig, I tell you what. I don't know. Alright. But Mr. Burke's clauses have not even this qualification in their favor. They become null by attempting to become immortal. The nature of them precludes consent. They destroy the right which they might have by grounding it on a right which they cannot have. Immortal power is not a human right and therefore cannot be a right of Parliament. The Parliament of 1688 might as well have passed an act to have authorized themselves to live forever as to make their authority live forever. All therefore that can be said of those clauses is that they are a formality of words of as much import as if those who use them had addressed a congratulation to themselves, and in the oriental style of antiquity had said, "O Parliament, live forever." I love his theatrics. I love his theatrics, man. That is beautiful. So, this is a really neat phrase. I love this. So, they become null. They, meaning the clauses and the laws, become null by attempting to become immortal. The nature of them precludes consent. I am looking like I'm marking out words because I'm really bad at underlining. This is a skill they don't teach you enough in school. They say to underline shit, but they never teach you how. I guess you're supposed to practice to know how, but I will eventually practice. They destroy the right which they might have by grounding it on a right which they cannot have. Immortal power is not a human right, and therefore cannot be a right of Parliament. That is a great statement. It is not a human right. You cannot have immortal power, therefore no government can have immortal power. Every law that is passed in every generation shall be questioned by that generation and repealed, or I guess they consent. So how do we get them to consent? We don't teach them. We don't even encourage them to read. We offer them an influx of distraction, and maybe if they don't notice how we're fucking them, they're consenting to us fucking them. That's consent. But I think it's intellectual and legalistic rape. And we're being raped every day. Every day. Every day that you don't know what the Constitution says. Every day you don't understand that you have the right to repeal the laws of the country that you live in. You're being raped. This is rape. This is rape. Alright. So, he's saying that they, like, this is about, what this their declaration is about as important as they're like, oh, congratulations to us, and say, oh, Parliament, may ye live forever. The circumstances of the world are continually changing, and the opinions of men change also, and as government is for the living and not for the dead, it is the living only that has any right in it. That which may be thought right and found convenient in one age may be thought wrong and found inconvenient in another. In such cases, who is to decide, the living or the dead? Beautiful! God damn, what a paragraph! Wow! I love this book, man. This is good shit. This is stuff that, like, you need to put into words, because otherwise, like, who the hell is gonna think it? I mean, you'll think it, but it'll be all disjointed. This guy is pulling stuff together. As almost 100 pages of Mr. Burke's books are employed upon these clauses, it will consequently follow that if the clauses themselves, so far as they set up an assumed usurped dominion over posterity forever, are unauthoritative, and in their nature null and void, that all his voluminous, takes up a lot of volumes, inferences, and declamation drawn therefrom, or founded thereon, are null and void also. And on this ground, I rest the matter. So he's like, dude, you wrote 100 pages for fucking nothing, dude. For nothing. Nothing. You wrote 100 pages. Anything that you think that you're approving by saying this, or by pointing to these clauses, you're wasting your breath. You're wasting your wrist. The manuscript of the furious writing. The hand cramp. For nothing. Because you know why, Burke? You's a bitch. I don't know. Alrighty. And on this ground, I rest the matter. I rest the matter. Man. Now we come more particularly to the affairs of France. Mr. Burke's book has the appearance of being written as instruction to the French nation. But if I may permit myself to use... Excuse me. Let's see. To the French nation. But if I may permit myself to use an extravagant metaphor suited to the extravagance of the case, it is darkness attempting to illuminate light. Oh man, that's a mic drop moment. While I am writing this, there are accidentally before me some proposals for a Declaration of Rights by the Marquis de Lafayette. I ask his pardon for using his former address, and do it only for distinction's sake, to the National Assembly. On the 11th of July of 1789, 3 days before taking the Bastille, the taking of the Bastille, and I cannot but remark with astonishment how opposite the sources are from which that gentleman and Mr. Burke draw their principles. Instead of referring to musty records and molding parchments to prove that the rights of the living are lost, renounced and abdicated forever, by those who are now no more... by those who are now no more, as Mr. Burke have done, Marquis de Lafayette applies to the living world, and emphatically says, "Call to mind the sentiments which nature has engraved in the heart of every citizen, and which take a new force when they are solemnly recognized by all. For a nation to love liberty, it is sufficient that she knows it. And to be free, it is sufficient that she wills it." How dry, barren, and obscure is the source from which Mr. Burke labors, and how ineffectual, though gay and with flowers, are all his declamation and his arguments compared to these clear, concise, and soul-animating sentiments. Few and short as they are, they lead on to a vast field of generous and manly thinking, and do not finish, like Mr. Burke's periods, with a music in the ear and nothing in the heart. Neat. Call to the mind the sentiments which nature has engraved in the heart of every citizen, and which take a new force when they are solemnly recognized by all. For a nation to love liberty, it is sufficient that she knows it, and to be free, it is sufficient that she wills it. So, any nation who knows liberty, they will love it, because liberty is so loving. And for any nation to be free, they just have to will themselves to be free, because the will alone subverts all authority of the oppressive power. Will alone subverts the authority of oppressive power. I like that. I'm going to say that. Alright, we're getting somewhere. I love the little ways that things are noted in books when I read them. It's good. So he's saying it sounds nice in the ear, but it means nothing in the heart. You got really shallow viewpoints, dog. As I have introduced Marquis de Lafayette, I will take the liberty of adding an anecdote respecting his farewell address to the Congress of America in 1783. And which occurred fresh to my mind when I saw Mr. Burke's thundering attack on the French Revolution. Marquis de Lafayette went to America at an early period of the war and continued to volunteer in her service to the end. His conduct through the whole of that enterprise is one of the most extraordinary that is to be found in the history of a young man scarcely then 20 years of age, situated in a country that was like the lap of sensual pleasure, and with the means of enjoying it. How few are there to be found who would exchange such a scene for the woods and wilderness of America, and pass the flowery years of youth in an unprofitable danger and hardship. But such is the fact. When the war ended and he was on the point of taking his final departure, he presented himself to Congress, and contemplating in his affectionate farewell the revolution he had seen, expressed himself in these words: "May this great monument raised to liberty serve as a lesson to the oppressor and an example to the oppressed." Fucking bars! 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 I'm just gonna write bars because it's funny to me. Bars. Alrighty. When this address came to the hands of Dr. Franklin, who was then in France, he applied to Court Vergennes, 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 to have it inserted in the French Gazette, but never could obtain his consent. The fact was that Court Vergennes was an aristocratic despot at home, and dreaded the example of the American Revolution in France, as certain other persons now dread the example of the French Revolution in England. And Mr. Burke's tribute of fear, for this light his book must be considered. For in this light his book must be considered. Tribute of fear. He's calling his book a tribute of fear. I need to read this book, man. Runs parallel with Count Vergennes' refusal. But to return more particularly to his work, we have seen, Mr. Burke says, the French rebel against a mild and lawful monarch, with more fury, outrage, and insult than any people has been known to rise against the most illegal usurper, or the most sanguinary tyrant. Sanguinary. Let's do a little bit of looking up. I haven't heard that word. Let's do a little bit of Googling. Googly. Sanguinary. What do we have? What do we got? Sanguinary. Involving or causing much bloodshed. God damn. Sanguinary. That's an important word. It's archaic. Let's see. This is one among 1,000 other instances in which Mr. Burke shows that he is ignorant of the springs and principles of the French Revolution. It was not against Louis the XVI, but against the despotic principles of the government, that the nation revolted. It was not against Louis the XVI, but against the despotic principles of the government that the nation revolted. Now, I've seen this word despotic thrown around in this book, and it's good to give it a meaning. So let's look it up. Of typical of despot, tyrannical. Despot means a ruler or other person who holds absolute power, typically one who exerts that power in an oppressive way. Despotic. What are you, a fucking despot? You think you have that kind of power? You don't have absolute power, you twig. I don't know. Let's see. These principles had not their origin in him, but in the original establishment many centuries back, and that they were become too deeply rooted to be removed, and the Ogden stable of parasites and plunderers too abominably filthy to be cleansed by anything short of a complete and universal revolution. When it becomes necessary to do a thing, the whole heart and soul should go into the measure or not attempt it. That crisis was then arrived, and there remained no choice but to act with determined vigor and or not to act at all. The king was known to be the friend of the nation, and this circumstance was favorable to the enterprise. Perhaps no man bred up in the style of an absolute king ever possessed a heart so little disposed to the exercise of that species of power as the present King of France. But the principles of the government itself still remained the same. The monarch and the monarchy were distinct and separate things, and it was against the established despotism of the latter and not against the person or principles of the former that the revolt commenced and the revolution has been carried. So they're saying it has nothing against Louis XVI. He may have been a fine fellow, but it's the system which he represented that was so vile and needed to be destroyed. We needed a root canal. We needed to pull it up and show the oppressor, you do not have the ability to oppress us any longer. So it doesn't matter how... The king could be sucking off everybody on the street, just giving everybody money, being the best guy around. But still, he's a king. He says he has absolute power, and that cannot be abided by. That system by which he rules cannot be abided by. We cannot let that stand. Therefore, the king must fall. I'm sorry. You're a good guy. That blowjob you gave me behind the alley was top-notch, fucking mint. But you gotta die. You gotta die. You stand for something that is the antithesis of humanity. You are inhumane as a being. If he would have renounced his monarchship, like his monarchy status, maybe he could have lived. But he didn't. He decided to uphold the system, so he had to go. He had to go. No, 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 no. Stick to the status quo. Okay. Mr. Burke does not attend to the distinction between men and principles, and therefore he does not see that a revolt may take place against the despotism of the latter, while there lies no charge of despotism against the former. The natural moderation of Louis XVI contributed nothing to alter the hereditary despotism of the monarchy. All the tyrannies of former reigns acted under that hereditary despotism. All the tyrannies of former reigns acted under that hereditary despotism were still liable to be revived in the hands of the successor. It was not the respite of a reign that would satisfy France, enlightened as she was then become. A casual discontinuance of the practice of despotism, and not a discontinuance of its principles. The former depends on the virtue of the individual who is in immediate possession of the power. The latter is on the virtue and the fortitude of the nation. So basically what I just said. So it's saying, like, the natural moderation of Louis XVI contributed nothing to alter he didn't change the system through which he gained the power. He just didn't abuse it. Therefore, he's saying any of the bad things that his predecessors did, and we have record of them doing, if he gave it to his son, his son could have done the same thing, even if his son was great. The fucking power that this guy has could will him to act terribly. Any of his, like, down the line, like, anybody down the line could have revigorated the spirit of tyranny that this despotic system of monarchy displayed, or had the potential to display. So, down with the system. It is not a discontinuance of its principles. So just because the person in power is not practicing it does not mean that the principles are not still rotten. The principles need a cleanse. So, in the case of Charles I and James II of England, the revolt was against the personal despotism of the men, whereas in France it was against the hereditary despotism of the established government. But men who can consign over the rights of posterity forever on the authority of a moldy parchment, like Mr. Burke, are not qualified to judge this revolution. But men who can consign over the rights of posterity forever on the authority of a moldy parchment, like Mr. Burke, are not qualified to judge this revolution. Wow. So if you believe that an old parchment gives someone the right over posterity, you don't even know what the revolution's about. You have no right to even open your mouth and judge it. Bars. It takes in a field too vast for their views to explore, and proceeds with a mightiness of reason they cannot keep pace with. He's saying people who appeal to moldy old parchments, their minds are small, they're dumb, small dick energy. And they can't keep pace with the times, man. But there are many points of view in which this revolution may be considered. When despotism has established itself for ages in a country, as in France, it is not the person of the king only, it is not in the person of the king only that it resides. It has the appearance of being so in show and in nominal authority, but it is not so in practice and in fact. It has its standard everywhere. Every office and department has its despotism, founded upon custom and usage. Every place in its bacille, every bacille in its despot. The original hereditary despotism resident in the person of the king divides and subdivides itself into 1,000 shapes and forms, till at last the whole of it is acted by a deputation. This was the case in France, and against this species of despotism, proceeding on through an endless labyrinth of office till the source of it is scarcely perceptible, there is no mode of redress. It strengthens itself by assuming the appearance of duty and tyrannizes under the pretense of obeying. So it's saying here, it's saying they have a duty to the people, and they're only obeying their duty. But the people have a duty to themselves. No one has a duty to the people. No one has the right to assume a duty for the people. When a man reflects on the condition of which France was in from the nature of her government, he will see other causes for revolt than those which immediately connect themselves with the person or character of Louis XVI. There were, if I may so express it, 1,000 despotisms to be reformed in France, which had grown up under the hereditary despotism of the monarchy, and became so rooted as to be in a great measure independent of it. Between the monarchy, the parliament, and the church, there was a rivalship of despotism besides the feudal despotism operating locally and the ministerial despotism operating everywhere. But Mr. Burke, by considering the king as the only possible object of revolt, speaks as if the French was a village, and in which everything that passed must be known to its commanding officer, and no oppression could be acted but what he could immediately control. Mr. Burke might have been in the Bastille his whole life, as well as under Louis XVI and Louis XIV, as well as under Louis XVI and as Louis XIV, and neither the one nor the other have known that such a man as Mr. Burke existed. The despotic principles of government were the same in both reigns, though the disposition of the men were as remote as tyranny and benevolence. I have not eaten dinner. I have been reading straight bores for a minute. Let's see, how much longer does it go without a break? Because I do want a break. It just doesn't, does it? Let me check the table of contents again. Part 1, the rights of man. It goes from 39 to 110. So, we have a long way to go. I've been here a while. You've been here a while. I'm good for a minute. We are here. Let's see. Let's see, I haven't taken a note in a while. So, a ruler may not be bad, but if the system through which he derives rule is bad, his rule ought to be abolished with the system. That's what I'm getting from this. So, they're saying that the whole system, there's despotism everywhere. It's not just the king. Anybody he's ever appointed has... The roots go deep. He's saying France was fucked, and now we gotta unfuck it. That's what the revolution was for. So, we'll pick up there. I think that was good.